Hello, everyone, and good morning. All right, let me first of all make a login. Yes. So yesterday we have started with the concept of iterative statements, and I told you there are four different types of loops what we use in programming: while, do while, for, and enhance for. Now we were being into while and do while, and I have told you that while is a precondition checking, whereas do while is post condition checking. And mainly these two are used rarely. Mostly it's enhance for loop. After that, it's for loop. So the basic difference between while and do while is like, when you execute a while statement, first of all, the condition is going to be get evaluated. So as in when condition, if it is true, then the block of statements, whatever has been written, will going to be get execute, otherwise not. Whereas in do while, it starts with do, then the block, and then while. Then it means in the do while, it's at least guaranteed that whatever the statements have been written inside the block, they are going to be get executed at least once. Why? Because the condition is actually checked after this whole statement inside the block are being executed. Then the control comes to the while, and then condition is going to be evaluated. Now, after this, the execution has done. After once the execution has done, whether they are going to be get repeated or not, whether these all conditions, whether these all statements, not condition, these all statements, are they going to be executed once again or not? It all depends on the condition. Means simple, that whether the loop would be executed or not, that depends on the condition. If condition, what is given over here, if the condition is true, then again the control goes back, again the control goes back inside the loop. But if condition what is given over here is tends to false, then it doesn't goes to the loop. It would come below to this whatever has been written. So that is what is a major difference between while and do while. All right. Let's move further with the for loops. And you have certain assignments as well, which I wanted every one of you to solve this. Now see, understand, there's one thing which I wanted to highlight. If you would closely observe this, the while statement, we could split this whole thing into three parts. The first is like you have defined one variable called as counter, integer counter variable, right? You have defined one variable over here called as counter. So this I could say as the variable declaration. This goes in a separate line. Then after that, after variable declaration, we have used the while. Inside while, I have given the condition that the value of the counter should not less than or equals to 10. Now, this is my condition. This is my condition. Yes, this is my condition. So we have variable declaration in a separate line, whereas condition checking in a separate line, and post condition checking, I mean, if you wanted to either perform increment or decrement of the counters or whatever, that is there in the separate line. So it is merely like three separate lines for three things. One for the initialization of the variable, second is for the condition checking, and third one is either the increment or decrement the conditions, right? The counters values, the variable values. And this happens for do while as well. In the do while as well, in this program, you can see that we define a variable and then we check for the condition. We check it later. That's the only difference. But otherwise, the things are same. The sequence is little up and down. But otherwise, all three things what we did in the while loop, we do this in the do while as well. There are three parts of this, right? Variable declaration, condition checking, and counter increment object decrement, right? In the same way, here as well, variable declaration, condition checking, and counter decrement and increment. So this happens in three different lines. And that's why I would say that while and do while, if you would use that loop, you would at least require 3 separate lines for while as well as for do while. Now, when we come to the for loop is the more optimized way of creating a recursive statements. It's the more optimized way. Is the more optimized way. How come it is more optimized? Because in the for loop, actually for loop have 3 separate parts. There are 3 separate parts. You know what happened with my mouse? I have to replace this, I think. ये देखो, ये एक लाइन में चल ही नहीं पा रहा है. I think I have to replace this one. Yes, anyways. So, for loop have 3 parts. And they are separated with a separator, but the symbol is not colon, it's actually semicolon, right? So there are 3 things into a for loop. There are 3 parts of a for loop. And they are separated with a semicolon. Understand? Not semicolon. Semicolon, yes. Now see, the first is initialization part. Now, when you are into the initialization part, you would define variable overs here. The second is condition checking, and the third is increment object decrement. So all 3 parts, what we have seen with while and do while, whereas we have seen them in the 3 separate lines, now they are here in a single line. They are here in a single line. So I could say that if you would use for loop, you can save 2 lines of the code, because the same thing, if we wanted to implement with do while or maybe a while, we would require 3 separate lines for this. And you could definitely, not club them in a single line. This goes against the format of, this goes against the syntax of do while and while. So for initialization of variables, for condition checkings, and for increment decrement part, in the while do while, we have 3 separate lines. We have to write it into 3 separate lines. So whereas in for loop, for loop have this format that all 3 of them, initialization part, condition checking, and increment decrement, you can club them in a single line, and they are separated by a symbol called semicolon. So for loop actually provides you the more optimized way of writing. And I have told you, like maybe yesterday, I don't remember, or day before yesterday, governor limits are something which you should always remember. Is something that you should always remember. And we should always have to do things within the boundary. We cannot go beyond that. Actually, it's not allowed even. It's not allowed. So there are few of the things which you should always keep them in mind. Like when you are doing a coding, you have to optimize your code as far as it is possible to optimize. So instead of using, and see, understand one thing. वो जैसे हिंदी में हम बोलते हैं ना कि बूंद बूंद से घड़ा भरता है, तो even a small drop could make a difference. So basically कैसा है कि even if you are able to save 2 lines, that is enough. Understand? If you are using for loop, if you have a iterative requirement in your program, and instead of using like while and do while, you are using for loop, that means you at least have saved 2 lines. All right. So this is good. This is good. And that is the reason, moreover, kaisa hai ki for loop seems to be a simple. It is not that complicated, right? So the format is very simple actually. And this is the reason, wherever we do require a loop, we use for loop. Why? Because it seems to be little simple as compared to while do while. So that's why, the programmer's first choice is to use the for loop. And moreover, it's optimized. That is the reason. So at least there are 2 good reasons why we always use for, and we simply skip using while and do while. So these are the 2 good reasons. First, it is the optimized one. It saves 2 lines of the code. And then it is a little easy one, right? All right. So let me show you a program for this so that you would have an understanding how could we use the for loops. So I'll go to developer console, and now I'm moving to the execute anonymous window. Right. So if I would have to print, for example, I'm writing a program, let's say, to print numbers between 1 to 10, right? So how I'm going to do that? So first of all, I would design a variable. I will define a variable integer, let's say counter or value something equals to, let's say the value is 1. And then if you do it with the while, so what you would require, you have to do it like this. Counter is less than or equals to 10, right? If you do it while and do while, that is what I wanted to do. Then system.debug the value of count equals to, and then you can plus counter. Now after this, you can perform counter plus plus, right? So this is one part. I mean, if you can do it like this, if you wanted to print 1 to 10. I missed a semicolon, right? Spelling mistakes. All right. So this is one way, like, you can do it with while. If I would prefer do while, how I'm going to write it, right? So this whole statements, I would not require this. I can do one thing would be like, I'll write like do and over here, I'll impose the condition. So while the value of counter is less than equals to 10. So this is what it is do while. Let me show you the execution of this as well. Yes. Here it would require a semicolon. In the while, it would require a semicolon over here. अरे यार ये माउस पे बहुत तंग कर रहा है आज. Oh yeah. एक मिनट मैं इसको बंद ही कर देता हूँ. चलो अभी ठीक है. Yes. So the same output, isn't it? Same output. While do while. But how many number of lines we have consumed? We have consumed one for variable declaration, another one for condition checking, another one for the counter increment decrement part, right? Now let me show you the same program. If I would use it with the for, so we can define variable inside it, right? First thing. So integer, maybe counter equals to 1. Let me copy this. Semicolon, you can put the space, you can, or if you don't want, you can keep, you can keep writing in continuous without any space. That is also allowed. If counter is less than equals to just 10, I make it more readable. So that's why I put up the space. Otherwise, you can, you can, without even giving the space, you can write it down. There's no issue. So for integer counter equals to 1 and counter is less than equals to 10, that is my condition. I can put up a over here as well. I'm not sure whether if I would put up a space, it would work or not. I'm not sure. But at least over here, you can put up a space. Counter is less than, yeah. So what I wanted like system.debug the value of count equals to plus, just give me the value of counter, right? So this is what, and you're going to see the same output. You're going to see the same output. So basically, using a for loop would minimize the code a little bit up to certain extent, just for 2 lines, not much, but at least that is also enough. That is also enough. When the requirement comes and you have to do everything in an optimized way, then you have to write it like that. And I would, as and when we would start doing the codings, I'm going to show you so many different ways to optimize. I'll tell you one story over here. Let me pause the recordings a little bit. So instead of using while and do while, we always use this for loop. Why? Because it would optimize your coding at least by 2 lines, and it would give the same output. There's nothing. And moreover, this seems to be a little easy. Like, you have the variable declaration, then condition checking and increment of the decrement part. Everything is in the same line itself, right? And if you have multiple lines, you can write it like this. You can create a block if you have multiple statements. If you just have, if you just have one line that should be get printed, you can even give it directly just after your loop. You can give it directly just after your loop. So this is also one way of writing the codes. All right. Let's move on to the second thing, which is enhanced for loop. But for enhanced for loop, you would have to learn one thing called as an array. All right, just give me 2 more minutes. I'll back. I'm stopping recording for 2 more minutes. I'll be back in a moment. Just give me 2 more minutes. Yes. So see, for learning the enhanced for loop, the enhanced for loop can only be applied on collections. First of all, understand this. Let me repeat this statement once again. The enhanced for loop, what we are going to learn after this for loop, there's something called as enhanced for loop. And by the way, enhanced for loop is only available in Apex programming. There is no other place. I know 3 to 4 different forms of programming, but I haven't seen anything like this. This is something which is we use this only in the Apex programming. So the enhanced for loop is something which could only be applied on collections. So we have 2 different forms of collections. We have 2 different forms of collections. The first is arrays. The second, the collection itself. You after arrays, after this all, you are going to learn something called as collection. So instead of saying arrays and collection, I'll make it more easy, a little more, sorry, a little more technical, that we have 2 different forms of collection. The collection of similar elements could be the first point, and the collection of dissimilar elements, second point. You don't have to write, you just have to understand. We have 2 different forms of collections. Oh my God. We have 2 different forms of collections. Collection of similar elements and collection of dissimilar elements. Now see, this is something I think you should write. Collection of similar elements. If there is a collection, for example, let me try to draw a diagram. If this is a collection which have all similar elements into this is one element, this is another, this is another, this is, but all of them, all of them have the same properties, the same attribute, the same data types, maybe. All right. So all of them are identical, in short. In short, if for example, if one of them is integer, all of them is integer. If one of them is a string, all of them is a string. One of them is character, all of them is character. One of them is a date value, all of them is a date value. One of them is an ID, all of them is an ID. One of them is a time value, date time value, all of them is a date time value. So if all the elements inside a collection, if all the elements inside a collection are exactly same in terms of data type. I'm not saying if one is 24, all of them has to be 24. No, one of them is 24, the another one could be 36. Another one could be 59. But what are the attributes of this 24, 36, 59? All of them are number. All of them are number. All of them are integers. All right. That is what I'm trying to explain. So if there is a collection, by the way, where all the elements you see are of the same data type, this type of collection, we call this as a homogeneous collection. Homogeneous collection. So there are 2 different forms of collection. The first is homogeneous. Homogeneous. Now inside a homogeneous collection, all of the elements are of the same property, of the same attribute, of the same data type. This is what is an homogeneous collection. Now the another form of this is, another form of this is heterogeneous. Now what happens in heterogeneous? Heterogeneous means what? Inside the collection, there are the elements. There are the elements because it's a collection. Collection is what? Collection is something we could say that is a group of several entities. When we combine them together inside in a boundary, that is what's in collection. That is what is in collection. So if this is a collection where the elements are dissimilar, they have different types of attributes, they could have different forms of data type. Some of them are integers, some of them are characters, some of them are something else, but they are being grouped inside a single entity. Now, this type of collection is called as heterogeneous collection. Heterogeneous. So there are two forms of collections, by the way, now, homogeneous and heterogeneous. Homogeneous is that which have all elements with the same attribute, with the same property, with the same data type. Heterogeneous, there are the elements of different attributes, different properties, and different data types. So there are two different forms of collections, homogeneous and heterogeneous. Now, so there are two different forms of collections. There are two different forms of collection. That is what is happening with my mouse. और diagram ऐसे नहीं बनेगा इसमें से. Anyways, let's forget that. बस एक और mouse है वैसे. One second यार. एक्चुअली ये वाला माउस वायर्ड है और वायर्ड माउस में बड़ी दिक्कत होती है. इनके वायर संभालने में आधा समय चला जाता है मेरा. और मुझे नहीं पता आज तक कि ये इतना लंबा वायर क्यों देते हैं. 3-3 फीट का वायर क्यों होता है. कभी किसी का माउस इतना दूर रहता है क्या सिस्टम के साथ. मतलब लॉजिकल थिंकिंग सोचना चाहिए कि माउस इंसान कनेक्ट करता है तो वो 1 फीट भी तो दूर नहीं रहता है, एक बिल्लस दूर नहीं रहता है. 3-3 फीट के वायर्स दे देते हैं और जहां वायर्स लंबे देने चाहिए वहां देते ही नहीं है. ऑलराइट, एनीवेज चलिए. सो देयर आर टू डिफरेंट फॉर्म्स ऑफ कलेक्शंस. There are two different forms of collections. All right. The one is like homogeneous and the another one is heterogeneous. All right. The another one is heterogeneous. Homogeneous have all similar elements. Homogeneous is a collection of all similar, whereas heterogeneous is a collection of dissimilar elements. So for particularly homogeneous type, you are going to learn something called as arrays. And for heterogeneous, you are going to learn something called as collections. Collections में भी 3 टाइप हैं, लिस्ट, सेट और मैप. ठीक है. जस्ट डोंट ड्रॉ एनीथिंग, सब पढ़ने वाले हो आप लोग. तो कलेक्शन में देयर आर 3 फॉर्म्स, लिस्ट, सेट एंड मैप. वेयरएज होमोजीनियस जो उसमें एक ही चीज है, अरे. तो चलो यहां से थोड़ा एक आइडिया अपने को मिल जाता है कि अरेज बेसिकली है क्या. अरेज बेसिकली है क्या. सो अरेज इज व्हाट, फर्स्ट ऑफ ऑल इट्स अ कलेक्शन. अरेज क्या है? इट्स अ कलेक्शन. कलेक्शन ऑफ व्हाट? कलेक्शन ऑफ सिमिलर एलिमेंट्स or collection of homogeneous element. If you would say homogeneous, that makes it more technical but more impressive. At the same time, it becomes more, see, knowing the technical term is always good. That shows how much knowledge you are having about of the particular technology. So arrays was what? They are the collection of homogeneous elements. That means of all of the kind of similar attributes, similar properties, similar data types elements. So how to define this and all? Let's try to understand this. I have not written any theory over here. That's very strange. I'm not sure why. Maybe I have explained in every batch, I have explained like this. So that could be a possibility, but at least I should have to write down the syntax. Oh yeah, it is over here. So how to define an array? How to define an array? First of all, you have to mention the data type. And then there's a symbol, opening and closing square brackets. Opening and closing square brackets. So this would indicate that this is an array. For example, the data type could be like what? String, integers, IDs, primitive, right? It should be a primitive. Now inside primitive, you also have object as a data type. I hope you remember this. If you don't remember, just scroll it back. Go to that particular section of notes and find it out there. There are two different forms of data type, primitive and S object. S object को मैंने अभी तक नहीं लाया पिक्चर में, because मैं जानता हूं उसको कहां पे लेके आना. लेकिन primitive में object itself is a data type. अच्छा चलो मैं ही बता देता हूं आप लोगों को. Let's go back to, काफी लंबा जाना पड़ेगा I think. So there are two different forms of data type, primitive and S object. Primitive data type and S object. Now inside primitive, you have all these data types, but you also have object. You also have object. So you can use an object as a data type. You can use an object as a data type, right? We're going to use that, don't worry. I'm going to show you that as well, like how we can use an object as a data type. How we can use an object. बहुत पीछे चला गया मैं. हाँ. So how to define an array, first of all, would understand. So आपको सबसे पहले you have to write down data types. Like I have written integer, strings, or maybe the name of the object, because object IDs हैं, strings हैं, dates हैं. And the name of the object itself is a data type. You know this: account, case, position. Whenever you are writing any custom entity, maybe it's an object, it's a name of a field. Every custom entity means the name of the object or name of the field is always appended with underscore C. C could be in caps, C could be in small. That's not an, but there must be two underscore. That is what is an API name. What is an API name? All right. What is an API name? Yes, I'm giving you this command. Let's make this more interactive. You have this command to unmute yourself. Tell me, what does it mean by API? Don't tell me the full form, application program interface. What does it mean by API? For example, if this is an object, I'll go to view fields or maybe view objects. I see position is the name, singular label. Plural label means uska tab name. Object name is position. But what does it mean by API name? Yes, come on, tell me. What is API name? What is API? Or you don't know this? ठीक है, चलो कोई बात नहीं, आगे पढ़ाने वाला हूं मैं. आगे पढ़ाने वाला हूं. There would be a concept called as ORM, object relationship and mapping. I would be explaining this over there. ठीक है, देखते हैं. Let's keep this pending at least for now. And you should have that curiosity कि क्या होता है API name. देखेंगे हम. ठीक है. So how to define an array? The first thing to mention is a data type. After that, followed by a symbol. What symbol? Opening and a closing square bracket. Square bracket in every language I have seen. I mean, I know C, C++, Java. Everywhere, I'm not sure about other languages, but these are some of the language which I know. Everywhere, to define an array, this is the symbol which have been used. Opening and a closing square bracket. So if I would have to define an integer array, I will define it like this. String array like this. ID array like this. Date array, account array, I like this, right? And then followed by the array name. That's a custom entity. You can give any name. Try to always follow the good naming conventions. Nobody would teach you that. Nobody would ask you that. But you should always, whenever you are giving a name, try to always give the relevant name. Equals to new. New is a keyword which is used to define the memory, which is used to reserve the memory. Then again data type. Again data type. Followed by this symbol once again, but give the size over here. Give the size, right? There are two different ways to give the size. But before that, please write down it somewhere or remember. Whenever you are defining an array, giving the size is mandatory. In the array declaration, giving the size is mandatory. Why it is mandatory? Why it is mandatory? Because array, please write it down. I'm not sure for how many days you are going to remember this. And you're going to forget this at the time of interview when it is supposed to learn this all. When you are supposed to know everything, that time probably you would forget this. And that would make a serious blunder. All right. So please, I hope you guys take running notes. Whenever you sit in the class, you sit with some pen and paper. Probably you take some running notes and everything. And maybe later on, whenever you study, you make your own notes. You make it fair. I hope I mean, this is just my personal assumption. I don't know whether you guys do this or not. चलो छोड़ो. तो हाँ, अरे अरे के बारे में मतलब कैसे बोलना चाहिए मुझको इस चीज को? This point is related to memory allocations. This point is related to memory allocations. Whenever you define a new, I mean, at the time of syntax, there is a new keyword, and this new is to reserve the memory, is to reserve the memory. But array follows a pattern of memory reservation, which is we call to be static memory allocations. There are two forms of memory allocation, static and dynamic. Dynamic you would be going to learn in collection, list collection, set collection, map collection. That time I would get to find that more. Let me make this point clear. Static memory allocations. So static memory allocations का meaning कैसा होता है? In the beginning itself, you are telling the compiler that I would require to store 10 integer values. And let's say this is an example. I'm exactly not sure how much amount of memory is required for one integer. Probably it's 4 byte. I don't know. And I even don't bother about this. Let's consider every integer would require 4 bytes. And you're defining an array of 10 of them. So 4 multiplied by 10 would be like 40 bytes. 40 bytes, right? 40 bytes. 1 byte is 10, 8 bits. Anyways, 40 bytes. So this definition, this definition would reserve 40 bytes of memory. Let's say if this is the 1 byte, this is first byte. 8 bits can be stored in one location. That's 1 byte. Then 2 byte. And then 3. And similarly, it goes like 40 bytes has been reserved, right? 40 bytes is reserved. Maybe like byte B1, B2, up to what? Up to 40. So this is something, this is an exact figure of amount of memory what is being reserved. This type of allocation, this type of allocation is called as static memory allocation. This type of allocation is called a static. And once you have defined the size, you cannot expand it or you cannot shrink it. It cannot grow or it cannot, what is the opposite of grow? है? भूल गया मैं. जो भी है. मतलब you cannot expand and you cannot shrink. तो इसको आप छोटा बड़ा नहीं कर सकते. Once that has been defined, see, even though if you would, for example, you define an array to store 10 integer variables, but you are storing only 5 of them. ठीक है? So the rest amount of memory would not going to be used for any other purpose. Why? Because you committed to store 10 variables. Now, if you are storing 5 of them, that means you are wasting 5 remaining portion of whatever it could be. How much the 5 integer would require, that much amount you are wasting. You are wasting it. Compiler would not going to allot this memory to any another whatever, any another transaction, any another declaration. That much of amount is reserved for, and this is something called a static memory allocation. So this is a drawback, isn't it? It's a drawback of a programming, of the drawbacks of arrays. And moreover, you cannot, I mean, you have defined and you define a memory for 10. And now during the course of the program, you're asking to store 11, 12, 13, it would even not allow that. This means you reserved a quota in the beginning. How much amount of memory you required, you preserve that in the beginning of the program. Now you cannot do anything beyond or within that. If you would store some less amount of memory, if you would consume less amount of memory, the remaining portion of the memory would be unused. And it was not going to allot it to anyone else till the time this transaction is going on. All right, so this is what is a drawback with arrays. There are so many of them. We are going to discuss this, don't worry. We are going to, I mean, as and when I will start the topic, that collection. जो मैंने कहा कि it's a group of heterogeneous elements, collection. तो collection start जब मैं करूंगा तब I'm going to discuss this as well. कि देखो मैंने तुमको array पढ़ाया है, array क्या है? तो हम डिस्कस करेंगे तो हम बोलेंगे हाँ चलिए अरे तो इज अ कलेक्शन, इट्स अ ग्रुप ऑफ सिमिलर एलिमेंट्स, इट्स अ ग्रुप ऑफ होमोजीनियस एलिमेंट्स. अच्छा अरे में क्या ड्रॉबैक है? तो फिर पता हम बोलेंगे कि हाँ नहीं अरे में क्या होता है कि द फर्स्ट थिंग आप डिफरेंट फॉर्म्स ऑफ एलिमेंट उसमें जमा नहीं कर सकते. इफ यू डिफाइन एन अरे, बिकॉज अरेज आर ऑलवेज डिफाइंड अलोंग विद द डेटा टाइप्स. तो जब आपने स्पेसिफिकली मेंशन कर दिया कि भाई साहब ये इंटीजर अरे है, तो उसमें सिर्फ इंटीजर ही स्टोर हो सकता है, उसमें फिर दूसरा कोई दूसरे फॉर्म का डेटा स्टोर नहीं हो सकता. दैट इज द फर्स्ट ड्रॉबैक, फर्स्ट लिमिटेशन. Second, it follows static memory allocations. Okay, once the memory has been defined in the beginning, and that has to be always, because size array in the array declaration size must be there. Then you cannot expand, you cannot expand, you cannot shrink, you cannot grow, you cannot reduce. Reduce was the worst. ये नहीं आ रहा था मेरे को. So you cannot grow, you cannot reduce. So there are these are the few drawbacks with the array, and that's why we are moving forward with the next type of this is called as collection. तो ऐसा एक अपना डिस्कशन होने वाला है बाद में होने वाला है, लेकिन अभी याद रखो उसको, क्या क्या बुराई क्या है. ठीक है. सो ये था आपका अरे, एंड दिस इज हाउ द अरेज आर डिफाइंड. नाउ गिविंग द साइज देयर आर टू डिफरेंट वेज. मैं बताता हूँ. एक तो ये कि बिगनिंग में ही दे दो आप. दिस वुड डिफाइन कि मैं 10 इंटीजर स्टोर करने वाला हूँ इन दिस अरे. एक अरे मैं फॉर्म कर रहा हूँ कस्टमर कोड्स का, जिसमें मैं 10 इंटीजर स्टोर करने वाला हूँ. एक अरे हम फॉर्म कर रहे हैं कंट्री नेम्स का, जिसमें हम 50 स्ट्रिंग वैल्यू स्टोर करने वाले हैं. सो दिस इज वन वे टू डू, वन वे टू गिव द साइज. देयर इज वन मोर वे टू डू दैट. आई एम गोइंग टू शो इन द प्रोग्राम. ऑलराइट, हाउ मच टाइम? 8:20 हो गया. ठीक है, तो हम वी आर गोइंग टू टेक दिस बाय टुमारो. Tomorrow probably, I know this is Sunday, but I could probably take a class. So just keep watching, just make a watch on your WhatsApp group. I could probably announce for a class because इस वीक में 2 छुट्टियां हो गई हैं हमारी. Alright, तो ठीक है, हमारे इस पर कल स्टार्ट करते हैं प्रोग्राम, या नेक्स्ट लेक्चर जब भी होता है तब. Alright, you have anything to discuss guys? कुछ है जिस पे आप लोग डिस्कशन करना चाहते हैं? You wanted to ask or you wanted to have a discussion on anything? We have plenty of time with us for today. All right, let me first of all stop the recordings.